Hi, are you using relational databases with Java? Great, then I have something for you. Today I'll talk about jOOQ. jOOQ is a type-safe way to access your database from Java. Hi, I'm Simon. Welcome to my YouTube channel. So what's jOOQ? jOOQ is a type-safe way to access your database from Java programs. If you want to learn jOOQ, just go to jOOQ.org and check out the documentation, and also don't miss the blog posts. Now, how does jOOQ work? Let's have a look at this diagram. There you can see that jOOQ consists of two parts. We have a jOOQ generator and we have a jOOQ domain-specific language. So if you want to use jOOQ in a type-safe manner, then you will use the jOOQ generator to generate Java classes from your database model. With these Java classes, you can then use the jOOQ DSL to access your database fully type-safe. Let's have a look at the code examples. I've created a Github project for you with all the source code. It's on github.com/cmach/jOOQ-quickstart. Just clone the repo and open it in your favorite IDE. I use IntelliJ, where I also can access the database. The example uses a Postgres database with a Sakila schema. The Sakila schema is originally from MySQL, but there are also parts from jOOQ to other database types. I created a Docker image, including Postgres and the Sakila schema for you. You can run it with the docker run command, or if you don't like to use Docker, you can install Postgres database locally and then use the two SQL scripts that are found on cmach/docker-postgres-sakila. I already started the Docker container, and now let's have a look how this looks. I can open a database connection here. The user is Postgres and the password is Sakila, and that's it. Now it connects to the database and we can inspect the schema. The Sakila database is a film database for film renting. So if you have a look at the tables, we see we have an actor, we have a film, we have an inventory, we have customers, and we also have a store with staff and rentals. The good thing about IntelliJ is that we also can create diagrams. So if I create a diagram from the tables, this will open in a window, and here we can then zoom in and see how the tables are related. So we have a film with the language, we have actors with the film, we have a store with an inventory, we have film categories, we have staff, we have address, city and country, and on the other side we will find the customer that has rentals and he rents some films. So that's it. Now, if we remember the picture from before, there is a jOOQ generator. How do we use that? This project is based on Maven and is a Spring Boot project. So I created it on start.spring.io and chose jOOQ as dependency, and then I get this example here, and if you scroll down you will find a jOOQ CodeGen Maven plugin. And here we see that it uses a database driver for Postgres, and in the configuration section we see that we use the same connection as I used before to connect to the database. So we have the URL, the user and the password, and then we have some configuration, what kind of database it is, what it should include, and what the input schema is. Then we have a target configuration. We can define in which package the source code should be generated. And that's what we do right now. So the easiest way is to run Maven compile. And Maven compile will not only compile the code, but first it will execute this Maven plugin from jOOQ. And if we look here at the console, we see that it generates code for 31 tables. So we have all the tables that we've seen before. We have an actor, we have category, country, customer, and so on. And this code goes into the target directory of Maven in a folder, generated sources, and there is jOOQ, and here we see the target namespace or the target package that we have defined, and we find the tables. We not only find the tables, we also find something called a record. I will talk about records just in a minute. But what we see here, that there are routines, that means we have some stored procedures in the Postgres database. So jOOQ also generates code that you easily can use, stored procedures. So it's, in my opinion, the easiest way to use stored procedures from Java is with jOOQ. There is an enum, as far as I can see here, that is also generated. Now, finally, we have all we need to create type-safe code, but the question is now, how do we create queries? If you go to the test Java folder, in the example project, you will find only one test. It's called query test, and the query test is a Spring Boot test. Transactional annotation means that after each test method execution, it will do a rollback. So that's exactly what we like to do, because we don't want to store the data or the changes in the database. So it's perfectly fine to have a rollback at the end. As we can see through the Spring Boot project and the jOOQ Spring Boot starter, there is also possibility to auto-wire the DSL context. The DSL context is the class to access the domain-specific language of jOOQ. And with that, we now can create some queries. So first of all, we want to find all films. Here we see that there is a shorthand method called select from. So it's the same as we would do select and then from film. And now the question is what this film is. This film is something from the generated code. So it's the name of the table. And with that, we can create type-safe queries. That means if we use the film here and the table is, for example, removed from the database and we regenerate the code, then our code no longer compiles. On the other hand, we see the usage of the records right here. So we do a query, so select from film, and then we call fetch. Fetch will create a result. The result is a list of film records. And then we can check if we have 1,000 films. So we have 1,000 films in the database, and then this will work. So we can run that to see what happens. And here we are. The test runs. And it's successfully run. And interestingly, we also see some debug code. I added the debug level for jOOQ. So this can be done in the application properties, logging level org.jOOQ, and I set it to debug. That's what I usually do during development time, that I can see what jOOQ is executing. And here we see that the query is executed from our query here in the code. And we also get a sample of the data that is returned from the database. That is very useful. If you have some errors or problems, we can go ahead and just have a look at that. And the query that is displayed here, we also can use in the database console to do that, or to run it manually and to check if everything is as we expected. Now, this is just an easy query. Let's have a look at a bit more complex query. Here we see that we want to find all actors of horror films. Now, first of all, what we do here, we have a projection. So instead of the shorthand select from before, we just select the first name and the last name of the actor. That's everything that's interesting for us. Then we tell that we want it to have from the table actor. And here we see that for every table that we have in the database, we can use these generated classes right here in our query. So we join the film actor, we join the film category, we join the category, and then we say the category name must be horror. So horror is the type of the film that we want to use or that we want to return. And then, because there are some actors that may have been in many of these films, we group by first name and last name, and finally we order that. And then we should get 155 horror films, or 155 actors that play in horror films, to be precise. So, and even this one runs as expected. Now, the difference between the first and the second query is that here we have a different result. The result is of type record 2, and it has string as the types. So that means we have a type-safe result that matches the projection that we have here in select, because first name and last name are both strings, so we get the record 2 with 2 strings. By the way, you will find records from 1 to, I don't know how many of these records are there, but enough to cover most of the requirements. Now the point is, if you're maybe familiar with other tools like Hibernate or so, then you will find this joining here a bit too much. So you have to write joins like you would do it in SQL. But if you have a one-to-one relationship between two tables, maybe there is a shorthand to do that. And this is exactly what jOOQ also provides. So we can select from film actor in the second query, and then we have from the film actor we can join the film category, and the category has a category table attached. So with this category we can navigate directly to the category table, and the same is possible from film actor to the actor table, because this is also a 2-1 relationship. We can directly navigate, and this saves us, if we have compared the two queries here, this saves us 1 to about 3 joins that we don't have to do, because they can be implicitly joined by jOOQ. Now the result here is maybe not what we expect. So very often we use kind of data transfer objects or records if you're working with Java 17 like I do. So it would be great if we could fill the result of the query directly to some records. And this is possible also with jOOQ for sure. I've created a record. It's called actor with first and last name. So it's a Java 17 record. It has a first name and last name as constructor and as parameters. So in the query, I can directly use them with fetch into, and fetch into tries to map the result. So the first name and the last name of the actor to this record, and because it has a constructor that matches, then jOOQ will use that constructor and return as a list of actors. So that's very convenient that we don't have to deal with the records from jOOQ. In some situations this is okay. In other situations we want to have a Java object that we define, or Java class, or a record that we define to use it in other places of our application, for example. Now this is about reading, and jOOQ has a lot of functionality about selecting data from the database. jOOQ also has an abstraction of the database, so there are some constructs that you can use, for example, in statements that maybe are not supported by your database, but jOOQ will emulate this functionality if it's not there. Now after selecting, maybe we want to insert data, and insert is straightforward to the select. So we have an insert into method on the DSL where we can insert into a film, we can define the columns, and we can set the values. And then it's not a fetch, it's an execute, and it returns the number of inserted films. In our case, it's just one. Now inserting with a simple insert statement is okay in many situations, but as we've seen before, jOOQ generates not only tables, it also generates records for our tables. And if the table is mutable and has a primary key, then you can use these records in terms of an active record pattern or close to this active record pattern to create entries in the database. So this time we create a new record from table film, and then we set the ID and the language ID, and the title, and then we just call store. And this will execute an insert statement like the first query, but we don't need to write our own insert statement. We can just use these records. And these records, these are very handy. You can use them, for example, in a UI to bind to a form where the user can enter the data, and you just have to store the film. You can also use this one to update the data. So you can do a select and return film record, for example, and then set the title of the film and just call store, and jOOQ will know if it has to execute an insert or an update statement. Then we have some other queries here where we see how we can use where clauses from films, for example. Here we use the film record, and there are also another very interesting functionality. It's a bit an advanced feature that was recently added to jOOQ. Often you want to read nested data, and if you know SQL, you know that this is usually not possible, because the result of a select statement is always a table. But in that case, we have a new functionality. It's called multiset. So first, before we look at the result, we look at the query. So what we want to select is actor first name and actor last name. And then we want to have all films from the actor. So we select from the film actor table, then we do this implicit join to the film table and select the title. Then we have to tell from where, so from the film actor table, and then we have a where condition where we join the film actor table with the outer actor table. And then instead of fetching the data, we convert it. So we call a converter, or we define a converter that is then called to create records. So we create a record film name, and finally we fetch the whole result into actor with films. Now let's have a look at this actor with films. This is a record with the first name and last name and a list of films. And the list of film is just a record film name, so it's only the film with the name. And if we execute this query, we see what jOOQ does in that situation, because this multiset is not supported by the database natively. But if we check out the query down here, we see that jOOQ is emulating this multiset. So that means we have a nested film name inside this multiset, and if we have a look at the query on top, this is that we can do to check this out. We open here a console right here in the database view. We can open default console, paste the query, format it, and have a look. So no surprise, we're selecting first name and last name, but then jOOQ is using JSON functionality from the database. And with this JSON functionality, if we execute this query right here, we can see in the result we have some JSON data. So we have first name and last name as columns, but the inner join with the multiset to get the film names is returned as JSON data. And that's the trick that jOOQ uses to create these nested elements. And again, this is very handy if you need to create a REST API, for example, and then you want to return all actors and a list of films with each actor, then it's a perfectly fine use case for that. So that was all from the quick start about jOOQ. There are a lot of more features, and I will do some more videos and write blog posts about what you can do with jOOQ. In the meanwhile, check out the jOOQ documentation, it's very good, and also go to the blog of jOOQ, where you will find a lot of information, a lot of examples about how you can use jOOQ, but also how you can use SQL and how you can improve your SQL skills. That's it for this session. Thanks a lot for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.